On the map, Denmark can look almost modest so low that its highest natural point, Millehoy, rises only 170.86 meters above sea level. And yet, this flat country carries a coastline that, if every inlet and tidal bend is counted, stretches to about 8,750 kilometers. That contradiction is the real doorway into Denmark, a nation shaped less by mountains than by water wind and the quiet mathematics of tides. So what happens when a homeland is basically an edge, an endless border between land and sea? And when the wind becomes power, not just weather, who decides what the landscape should look like? Denmark is a country that rarely rises upward, so it stretches outward instead, like a shoreline deciding it has nowhere else to go. Look closely, and the landscape reveals a quiet truth. Most of what seems natural here is actually the aftermath of ice. Not the dramatic kind with towering peaks, but the slow continent-sized pressure of glaciers that once rolled south and rewrote the ground with their weight. During the last ice age, thick ice sheets advanced and retreated across what is now Denmark, scraping bedrock, dragging sediments, and leaving behind a patchwork of moraines, those gentle rolling hills that look peaceful, until someone remembers they're basically frozen bulldozer tracks. When the ice melted, it didn't leave a single clean shape. It left a puzzle sandy outwash plains, clay-rich fields, kettle lakes born from stranded ice blocks and lowlands that sit so close to sea level, they feel like they're listening to the ocean breathe. That is why Denmark's geography feels less like land and more like land negotiating with water. The Jutland Peninsula reaches into the North Sea like a blunt question. The islands Funen, Zealand, and hundreds of smaller ones float in between seas that behave differently with tides, salinity, and wind patterns, constantly shifting the boundary lines. In the far north at Grennen, near Skagen, the visual drama becomes literal. Two bodies of water meet, collide, and refuse to blend quickly, their waves crossing like opposing opinions. It looks like a spectacle, but it's also a reminder Denmark is not just surrounded by water, it is composed by it. And then there are the cliffs, Denmark's rare moments of verticality. At Møns Klint, the chalk rises pale and sharp above the Baltic and almost shocking white against the sea's cold blue-gray. Those cliffs are not mountains. They are time-made visible chalk, formed from microscopic marine organisms that settled on an ancient seabed millions of years ago, compressed into bright stone. When waves strike the base and storms tear at the edge, the cliff crumbles, not as destruction, but as a constant reshaping. The sea takes the land collapses, and the coastline becomes a living draft. This is the Danish paradox in geological form. The land seems stable because the slopes are gentle, but the borders are restless. Sand moves, dunes walk, beaches shift season to season. On the west coast, storms and currents can redraw a shoreline fast enough for a local to notice within a lifetime. In the south and west, shallow waters and tidal rhythms build wide coastal flats. In places like the Wadden Sea, the ocean performs a daily trick, turning into land at low tide, then returning to claim it again. The ground there isn't a fixed surface. It's an appointment the sea keeps twice a day. The climate adds another layer to the story because Denmark is not just shaped by water, but by moving air. Westerly winds sweep in from the North Atlantic carrying moisture and weather that can change quickly, especially along the exposed coasts. Winters are often more gray than brutal, moderated by the ocean's stored heat. But storms can still arrive with a violence that feels out of proportion to the country's calm reputation. Summers can be bright and mild, the light stretching long into evening, turning harbors and fields into soft gold. Yet even on the gentlest day, wind is present on the water across the flatlands. In the trees that lean without noticing they've learned to lean. In this wind and water world, the ground becomes precious. Denmark's soils, many of them laid down by glacial processes, help explain why agriculture has long been central to Danish life. The land may not be tall, but it is workable. The fields are often broad and open, broken by hedgerows, villages, and occasional forests that feel carefully held rather than wild. Even the forests tell a story of human shaping. What grows where is influenced not only by nature, but by centuries of management, protection, and replanting. Yet the deepest force here might be something quieter than glaciers or storms sea level itself. In a low country, a few centimeters are not an abstract statistic. They are a future shoreline. They are a seawall debate. They are a choice between holding the edge and letting it retreat. Denmark's geography teaches this lesson without speeches. When land is low, every tide is a measurement, and every storm is a rehearsal. So Denmark becomes a place where the ground is never just ground. It is history pressed into sediments, cliffs, carved from ancient oceans and coastlines that keep moving like a living thought. And if the borders between land and sea can shift so easily, what does permanent even mean here? In Denmark, nature doesn't announce itself with altitude. It reveals itself through edges, where salt meets soil, where reeds turn into open water, where a forest line breaks, and the sky suddenly feels twice as big. The country's ecosystems are stitched together by coast, and that single fact changes the entire cast of life here. Birds arrive as if Denmark were a resting breath on a long migration route. Fish move in and out with the seasons. Plants learn to tolerate wind that rarely apologizes. Nowhere shows this better than the Wadden Sea along the southwestern coast. Twice a day, the ocean performs a transformation that feels almost unreal. It drains away and leaves the seabed exposed miles of tidal flats, shining with wet sand and dark mud. In that brief window, Denmark becomes something else, a feeding ground the size of a continent's hunger. Under the surface, worms small crustaceans, and shellfish turn mud into a buffet. Above, birds gather in numbers that can feel impossible. Geese, sandpipers, plovers, species that have crossed countries and storms, just to arrive at this exact rhythm of water. The drama isn't loud, it's precise. A bird lands probes. The mud pulls up a living thread and lifts off again. The tide returns. The menu disappears. The birds wait for the next opening, as if the sea itself has scheduled their survival. In a place like this, biodiversity is not a list of species, it is timing. And that is also why it is fragile. If sea levels rise, if storm patterns change, if warming water shifts, the life below the surface, the entire clockwork of this ecosystem can wobble. Along the coast, another world starts, where land becomes dry enough to hold plants that can endure salt, spray, and shifting sand. Dune grasses anchor the edges, their roots acting like quiet engineers. Behind them, heaths and scrublands spread in patches, low, hardy vegetation shaped by wind grazing and human history. In parts of Jutland, the open heath landscape can look almost minimalist purple heather in late summer, pale grasses in winter, and a horizon that stays wide, no matter where one stands. This openness is its own habitat. It welcomes insects that thrive in sun and wind, ground-nesting birds that need space, and mammals that move like shadows through low cover. Then there are the forests, often smaller and more managed than the wild woodlands people imagine. in the far north, but still alive with quiet complexity. Deer slip between trunks. Foxes cross paths at dusk. Songbirds turn spring into a layered soundtrack. In some areas, large raptors can be seen again, eagles riding thermals above fields and treetops, scanning a landscape that is half nature, half human design. Denmark's wildlife frequently lives in that overlap, adapting to hedgerows, canals, and farms that have existed long enough to become part of the ecological map. Denmark's sea is not just scenery, it is habitat economy and mystery. Coastal waters can hold eelgrass meadows that work like underwater forests, sheltering juvenile fish and softening wave energy. Where eelgrass thrives, life multiplies small fish, hide larger fish hunt, and seabirds dive with sudden, clean precision. In colder seasons, the sea becomes a stage for another type of visitor marine mammals that appear like punctuation marks in the water. Seals haul out on sandbars or rocky edges, resting in groups that look almost casual until a sudden movement sends them sliding back into the sea as if gravity changed its mind. And out beyond in the straits and coastal waters, porpoises can surface briefly, quiet, quick, easily missed, if the viewer is not paying attention. This is Denmark's marine life in miniature, not a constant spectacle, but moments that reward patience. The ocean here is rarely tropical blue. It is gray-green, steel-toned water that doesn't perform for the camera. Yet it is full of life, and it carries its own kind of beauty. The low shimmer of light on waves, the hush of mist, the sudden arc of a seabird's wings. At the northern tip around Skagen, migration becomes a visible phenomenon in the sky. This is where routes converge, where birds funnel along coastlines and hesitate at the open water. On certain days, the air can feel crowded with motion raptors, gliding smaller birds, flickering through the wind flocks, forming and breaking like living smoke. It's one of those places where Denmark feels less like a destination and more like a passageway, a country that living creatures use as a bridge. But Denmark's ecosystems are not protected by poetry. They are pressured by modern realities that arrive quietly: warmer winters, shifting rainfall, stronger storms, rising seas, and the constant strain of human activity near coasts. In a low-lying country, even small changes in sea level can mean big changes in habitat. Salt water can creep into freshwater wetlands. Storm surges can reshape dunes. Coastal birds can lose nesting areas that once seemed permanent. And in the sea, changes in temperature and chemistry can alter the distribution of fish and the stability of the food web. On land, Denmark faces another tension: how to keep nature alive in a landscape that is intensely used. Fields feed people, Towns expand, roads cut through habitats. The question becomes less about saving wilderness and more about rebuilding connections, creating corridors, restoring wetlands, protecting coastal zones, and allowing certain places to be messy and alive rather than perfectly controlled. Rewilding projects renewed forests and restored marshes can become acts of repair attempts to give nature more room to breathe within a human-shaped country. And yet Denmark's biodiversity still holds a stubborn resilience. Life returns when given space. Birds still arrive in vast numbers when the tidal flats remain rich. Seals still haul out when they feel safe. Heathlands still bloom when maintained with care. The story is not simply loss. It is negotiation between the habits of centuries and the pressures of the next century. Standing on a Danish coast, one can feel how everything is connected. A gust of wind can be traced across the sea, into the dunes over a field, and into a tree line. The tide that exposes a feeding ground for birds also shapes sediments that shape plants, that shape insects, that shape the birds again. Even the chalk cliffs, bright, fragile, constantly eroding, become part of the ecological narrative, offering nesting opportunities, creating microhabitats, and feeding minerals back into the coastal system as they crumble. This is what Denmark teaches quietly but relentlessly. Ecology is not a separate chapter from geology or culture. It is the living layer on top of deep time and human choice. When the climate shifts, when water rises, when a coastline moves, it's not just a map changing. It's a chain of life adjusting, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So the question Denmark leaves hanging in the air is not whether nature is beautiful. It clearly is. The question is sharper and more uncomfortable. If a country is built on edges, on tides, on coasts, on thin margins between land and sea, how carefully must it listen to those margins before they begin to disappear? Before Denmark was a kingdom, before it was a name on maps and treaties, it was a low, shifting threshold, ice-retreating sea, arriving forests, advancing and pulling back with the centuries. The earliest human story here begins with movement, not grand migrations narrated by banners, but small groups following animals, reading shorelines, learning where the land was solid enough to trust. As the last ice loosened its grip, the geography turned into a corridor. New coasts emerged, rivers changed course, forests spread into spaces that had been bare, and people followed the new life that arrived dear wild boarfish, in shallow waters, birds gathering where land met sea. Early communities learned Denmark, the way one learns a tide table by watching, remembering, and adapting. A shoreline could be food, a marsh could be danger. A winter could erase a path that had seemed permanent in summer. Over time, the relationship with the sea became more than survival, it became identity. In a country made of peninsulas and islands, water was never a distant horizon. It was the route between families, the boundary between neighbors, and the fastest road when forests were thick and the ground was wet. The earliest boats were not just tools, they were decisions. To travel by water meant trusting a surface that could change in minutes. And yet, that trust opened the world. Coastal people can measure distance differently, not by how far the feet can walk, but by how far a shoreline can carry a craft with wind behind it. As farming began to take root across northern Europe, Denmark's landscape, soft, workable, and close to water, made it possible for settlements to become less temporary. Fields could be carved from forest. Animals could be kept through seasons rather than chased through them. Villages could form in places that balanced protection and access near fresh water, near coastlines, near routes that mattered. But the older instincts never disappeared. Even as people stayed, they stayed with the awareness that the sea could take land back, that storms could reshape a beach, that a winter could turn travel into confinement. This early cultural layer is often visible not in written records, but in what people left behind: burial mounds that rise gently from fields, stone settings that look like simple geometry against the sky, traces of settlements near ancient shorelines now shifted inland. These are not just archaeological features. They are evidence of a worldview that land was not merely occupied, but negotiated with, claimed, honored, and sometimes feared. And then there is the material. Denmark was built on wood. Forests once covered much of the land, and wood became the language of daily life homes, tools, fences, boats, heating, and craft. To understand early Denmark is to understand how a culture shaped by water depended on trees to survive it. The boat demanded timber. The house demanded timber. The fire demanded timber. The coast demanded timber too, because the sea was both provider and threat, and protection often began with what could be built. In a landscape like this, culture grows from closeness. Villages were rarely isolated in the way mountains can isolate. The sea connected. The waterways connected. The islands encouraged trade, intermarriage rivalries, alliances, and early network of human relationships, tied together by roots that looked like simple lines on a map, but felt like lifelines in practice. Ritual and belief also followed the shape of the land. When a coastline changes and storms arrive without permission, it is natural for people to imagine forces behind them, spirits in water, meaning in wind, in tension, in the shifting boundaries of earth. Sacred places often formed where the world felt thin at springs, near wetlands, along coastal edges where fog could erase distance. In such places, the environment itself becomes a teacher. Water that gives life can also drown. Ice that preserves can also kill. Wind that moves boats can also wreck them. How does a community make peace with that truth without turning numb? Even the idea of time becomes different near the sea. Tides mark hours, seasons mark routes, storms mark generations. People remember the winter that froze the coast, the year the water took a field, the season when fish vanished and returned. This memory becomes culture stories told not simply to entertain, but to train the next generation's instincts. As centuries passed, Denmark's early societies grew more layered. Hierarchies formed. Trade expanded. Metalwork and craft advanced. People did what humans always do when survival becomes slightly more stable. They built meaning status art in conflict around resources and relationships. Yet the environment kept editing their plans. In a low country, power cannot ignore the water. A leader might rule people, but no one rules a storm. A settlement might claim land, but the sea can revise borders overnight. This is where Denmark's quiet drama begins to sharpen the tension between permanence and movement. A farm wants stability. A coastline refuses it. A village wants predictability. The wind offers variation. A community wants to believe it is rooted. The landscape keeps reminding it that roots must stay flexible or break. And in that flexibility, something distinctive forms an early Danish sensibility that values craft practicality and cooperation, not because it is fashionable, but because the environment demands it. A boat is rarely built by one person. A harvest is rarely protected alone. A village survives harsh seasons through shared labor, shared knowledge, and shared restraint. Even conflict, when it comes, is shaped by geography. The sea can bring strangers quickly. The flatlands can make movement swift. The islands can turn defense into strategy. Long before Denmark became famous for calm cities and modern design, it was already learning an older version of the same lesson. Beauty is not separate from function. A well-made object, whether a tool, a vessel, a home, was not only useful. It was safety. It was dignity. It was survival refined into something that could be handed down. As maritime skill deepened, Denmark's relationship to the wider world inevitably grew. Coastal communities are rarely content to stare at the horizon forever. Boats become better, routes become known, exchanges become routine. Goods and ideas travel with the same ease as fish and timber. Even if early Danes did not call it globalization, they lived the truth of it. The sea brings change. It always has. This period also laid the emotional groundwork for what later ages would call Scandinavian resilience. Not the loud kind, no dramatic declarations required, but the steady kind that comes from living in a place where the environment is never fully conquered, only understood. Children raised near coasts learn to read weather quickly. Adults learn to plan with humility. Communities learn that preparation is not pessimism. It is respect. And yet, even with all this practicality, there is room for wonder. A sky that stretches above flat land can make sunsets feel endless. A winter coastline can look like a world erased and redrawn in gray and white. A summer evening can linger, turning time soft and slow. Those sensory experiences become part of the cultural DNA, shaping how people speak, how they gather, how they find warmth physically and socially when the outside world is harsh. So Denmark's early human story is not just a preface to later history. It is the foundation of a particular way of living close to water, shaped by wind, anchored by craft, and sustained by community. But here is the question that lingers before the next chapter begins. When a homeland is built on edges coasts that move tides, that return storms, that rewrite the shore, does that make a people more restless or more rooted than anyone expects? Denmark's history does not begin in palaces. It begins in water-narrow straits, protected bays and coastlines that offered both shelter and a doorway outward. When the Viking Age arrives in the story, it should not be framed only as conquest. It should be framed as geography becoming ambition. A people surrounded by roots learned to treat the sea as a road and the ship as a kind of moving homeland. In places like Roskilde, the landscape feels like a quiet explanation for that maritime power. A fjord-like inlet reaches inland, offering protection from the open sea while still connecting to it. This is where ships could be built, launched, repaired, and hidden. In the Danish imagination, Roskilde becomes more than a town. It becomes a reminder that the most influential places are often those that sit slightly back from the coast, close enough to travel far enough to endure. Further west, Ribe, often described as one of Denmark's oldest towns, sits as proof that trade was not a side note. It was a foundation. Merchants, travelers, and craftsmen turned Denmark into a node in wider networks of exchange, where goods moved the way tides do repeatedly, predictably shaping habits and wealth over generations. And then down on the eastern side, Copenhagen rises from the logic of a harbor. It grows because it is useful, not because it is dramatic. A city can be born from a simple advantage, a place where ships can anchor, where commerce can be watched, where power can be concentrated near water that connects rather than isolates. The city becomes Denmark's face to the sea, its gateway and its mirror. But Denmark is not only a story of building. It is also a story of being pulled between larger forces, neighbors' empires, alliances, and storms of politics that can feel as relentless as weather. Over centuries, Denmark's position at the meeting point of important waterways turns into leverage. If ships must pass through narrow straits, then whoever controls those straits controls a kind of invisible economy. That logic-shaped diplomacy conflict, and the sense that Denmark's location was both a gift and a burden. History turns sharper at the edges of Denmark's map, places like Kronborg Castle at Helsingør, staring across the Øresund toward Sweden. Here, the idea of a border is not a line on land. It is water with eyes on both sides. Kronborg is famous in cultural memory, but its presence is also practical, an old statement of control over passage and trade. Standing there, one can almost feel the past as a constant watchfulness, a reminder that in Denmark, security was often measured in ships and straits. Denmark's story also includes moments when power looked outward towards the North Atlantic, toward islands, toward influence beyond the immediate coast. Yet even as Denmark participated in larger European currents, the most lasting imprint remains close to home: castles, churches, old town centers, and the layered architecture of a country that kept rebuilding after fires, wars, and political shifts. There is a particular Danish rhythm to this rebuilding. It is rarely framed as a romantic comeback. It is framed as continuity. When something burns, it is rebuilt. When borders change, life continues. When the world shifts, Denmark adapts quietly, sometimes painfully, sometimes brilliantly, often without spectacle. One of the clearest turning points arrives in the 19th century, when Denmark's political and territorial realities tightened. The country's shape becomes more defined, and its identity becomes more internal. This period is not a simple rise or fall, it is a recalibration. Denmark begins to lean harder into what it can do: well-governance that works, communities that cooperate, education that spreads agriculture, and industry that modernize. The sea remains present, but Denmark's strength becomes less about expansion and more about refinement. In cities and towns, this shift can be felt in the built environment: orderly streets, public buildings, harbors redesigned for new types of commerce. In the countryside, it can be felt in the way fields are managed, in the cooperative traditions that emerge, in the deep cultural instinct that a small country survives best when it stays organized. Then the 20th century arrives, and Denmark faces the same brutal truth that much of Europe faced: geography offers no immunity from global conflict. The occupation years are not simply history, they are emotional residue. They left Denmark with a sharpened understanding of vulnerability and resilience, and a desire afterward to build a society that could withstand shocks. That post-war rebuilding becomes one of Denmark's modern legends, not because it is flawless, but because it is intentional. Denmark invests in social systems, public trust, and civic design that encourages daily stability. The story becomes less about kings and battles and more about the architecture of ordinary life: schools, healthcare, public transport, housing, and the invisible agreements that make a society feel safe. And then comes the modern pivot that makes Denmark feel like a documentary subject. In the present tense, the transformation of wind from background noise into infrastructure. In a country where wind is constant, the question eventually becomes unavoidable. Is this just weather, or is this power waiting to be used? The energy crises of the late 20th century pushed Denmark toward a new identity. Wind turbines begin to appear not as symbols, but as experiments, then as solutions. Over time, they become part of the horizon, and the horizon itself becomes political. A turbine changes the view. It also changes dependency. It asks a community to accept a different kind of landscape in exchange for a different kind of future. This is where Denmark's earlier history echoes back. A maritime people once trusted wind to move ships. Now the same wind becomes electricity captured, measured, fed into a grid that must balance fluctuations, like a captain balancing a vessel in shifting seas. The technology is modern, but the relationship is ancient. Learn the wind, respect the wind, benefit from the wind, and never pretend it can be controlled completely. Meanwhile, Copenhagen evolves into a capital that performs Denmark's modern self-image design: forward, livable, water-facing, carefully planned yet still human-scaled. The harbor that once served trade and defense now also serves culture: cafes, bridges, swimming zones, bikes, moving like a silent current through the streets. But beneath that calm surface is the same old Danish tension. The country's future is still being negotiated with water. Because Denmark's historic advantage being low coastal connected also becomes a modern vulnerability. Sea level rise and stronger storm patterns don't arrive as abstract science. They arrive as questions about infrastructure, coastlines, and planning. Where should walls be built? Where should land be allowed to retreat? How much can a city hold the sea back before it must learn to yield? And the deeper question is cultural, not just technical. What does it mean to preserve a heritage that is literally built near the waterline? A castle by a strait, a church by a harbor, an old town by a shifting coast. How many centuries can they endure if the ocean's behavior changes faster than memory can keep up? Denmark's historical journey. Viking routes, trade towns, castles guarding straits, a capital built on a harbor, a modern society built on trust. Reads like a long conversation with the same elements, water wind, and the human need to belong somewhere stable. Yet, Denmark has never been truly stable in the way mountains are stable. It has always been stable in a different way. Stable like a boat that keeps its balance because it never stops adjusting. So as the story transitions toward Denmark's modern challenges and cultural life, a final question hangs in the air, quiet but insistent. If a nation's power once came from controlling the passage of ships, what happens when the next great passage is not ships at all, but climate energy and the moving edge of the sea? Denmark's modern life can feel like a polished surface, clean streets, calm harbors, bicycles, flowing through cities with the quiet confidence of routine. But beneath that calm is a country still living on an edge. The same geography that once made Denmark powerful low land. Long coasts, narrow straits, now makes it unusually sensitive to a warming world. In a flat country, the horizon is not just scenery. It is a warning system. A few centimeters of sea level rise is not an abstract line on a climate chart. It is saltwater, pushing into freshwater places. Storms biting deeper into beaches and coastal erosion, turning stable land into a temporary agreement. Along exposed shores, stronger storm surges can chew away dunes that took decades to form. In low-lying areas, heavy rainfall can overwhelm drainage and turn streets into shallow rivers. Denmark's landscape does not allow denial to last long. Water always returns, and it always tests the border. That is why protection here often looks like engineering, but feels like philosophy. Do you defend every meter of coastline as if land can be held like property? Or do you accept that in some places, retreat may be the more honest choice? The debate is not only about budgets and concrete, it is about identity. Denmark is a nation of coasts. Losing a coastline is not just losing land, it is losing a piece of the national self-image. And yet, Denmark's response to uncertainty has often been to plan rather than panic. Nowhere is this more visible than in the way Denmark treats energy. Wind is no longer background. It is infrastructure, politics, and culture. Offshore turbines rise like slow-moving giants on the horizon, and on land, turbines and transmission lines become part of the countryside's modern silhouette. For some, they symbolize progress. For others, they interrupt the landscape's quiet beauty. Either way, they force a question that Denmark cannot avoid. What is a view worth, and what is a future worth? The challenge of high wind power is not simply generating electricity, it is integrating it. Wind arrives in pulses, not promises. Some days it floods the grid, other days it recedes. A modern society still needs lights, heat, transport, and industry even when the sky is still. Denmark's answer has been to treat the energy system like a living organism, flexible, interconnected, capable of balancing change. That means smarter grids, cross-border connections, storage and demand systems that can shift like sailors adjusting sail to weather. This is where Denmark's old instincts return in modern clothing. A maritime culture understands variability. It expects change and prepares for it. The same mindset that once read clouds and currents now reads forecasts, consumption patterns, and infrastructure needs. Wind becomes a shared project rather than a distant utility, something tied to community choices, national policy, and global responsibility. Denmark's cultural life, meanwhile, is often defined not by dramatic extremes, but by the art of balance. In cities like Copenhagen, water has become part of public space rather than an obstacle. Harbors are not only industrial zones, they are places to swim, gather, and breathe. Bridges are not just crossings. They are stages where daily life flows. The city shows a modern Danish belief. If you must live with water, then you build a society that includes it rather than turning away from it. But Denmark is not only its capital. In smaller coastal towns, modern life still revolves around boats, fishing, and seasonal rhythms. In rural areas, farmland remains central, and the conversation about climate becomes immediate changing rainfall, shifting growing seasons, and the pressure to protect soil and water quality. Denmark's countryside may look calm, but it is a working landscape. And work is where change becomes undeniable first. The cultural instinct often associated with Denmark hygge. The pursuit of warmth and togetherness makes sense in this context. It is not just a lifestyle trend, it is a response to climate and latitude. Long, dark winters teach people to build light, indoors candles, shared meals, quiet conversations, rooms designed for comfort. Hygge is not escapism, it is adaptation. It is the human version of insulation, emotional and social. But even comfort has its tensions. Denmark is a country that draws visitors precisely because it feels livable and calm. Tourism can become both gift and pressure. Coastal areas and iconic city neighborhoods can feel crowded, and nature zones, dunes, wetlands, tidal flats can suffer when too many feet arrive without care. In protected areas, the risk isn't just litter or noise. It's erosion of fragile ground, disturbance of nesting birds, and the slow damage that comes from loving a place too loudly. Denmark's conservation challenge is therefore not only about saving nature, it is about designing systems where people can experience nature without consuming it. Boardwalks, signage restrictions, seasonal closures. These can look like limitations, but they are actually invitations to respect. In a country where nature is interwoven with human space, protecting biodiversity often means managing behavior rather than building fences. And then there's the deeper tension Denmark shares with many modern societies' speed. The world accelerates technology, economics, expectations. Denmark's culture often sells itself as slow, thoughtful human-scaled. But can a society remain human-scaled while meeting global demands, clean energy targets, economic competitiveness, housing pressures, and rising costs? Can it keep trust intact when social debate becomes louder, more polarized, more impatient? Standing on a Danish shore today, one can feel how close all these questions are. The wind that powers turbines is the same wind that drives storms. The sea that brings tourists is the same sea that threatens low land. The coastline that defines identity is the same coastline that may shift in the coming decades. Denmark's modern challenge is not to choose one side of this story. It is to hold both truths at once. The country is a model, in some ways, vulnerable in others, and human in all of them. So Denmark's present becomes a continuation of its oldest theme, living on an edge, and learning to turn that edge into a kind of strength. But the final question remains quiet, but unavoidable. If Denmark has learned to harvest wind and live beside moving water, can it also teach the rest of the world what it means to adapt without losing the soul of a place. Denmark does not overwhelm with height or heat. It doesn't demand attention with extremes. Instead, it offers something rarer, a country built from boundaries where land ends, water begins, and the wind never truly stops speaking. From glacial soils and chalk cliffs to tidal flats that appear and vanish like a daily miracle, Denmark's landscape is a reminder that solid ground is often an illusion. The sea has shaped this place for millennia, carving coastlines, feeding ecosystems, opening trade routes, and forcing human life to become skilled at adjustment. That same sea now brings Denmark into the next century's hardest questions about rising waters, changing storms, and what it will cost to protect low land without turning it into a fortress. And yet Denmark's story is not only one of vulnerability, it is also one of choices. Choices to build with care, to plan rather than deny, to treat wind not as noise, but as a shared resource, to create cities where water is not pushed away, but invited into daily life. To protect nature not by pretending humans can disappear, but by designing how humans behave. Because maybe that is Denmark's quiet lesson. The future will not belong only to the strongest or the biggest. It may belong to the places that learn how to stay human, while adapting places that can change their systems without erasing their identity. So if this country feels peaceful, it is not because it is untouched. It is because it has practiced balance for a long time between coast and field progress, and preservation, comfort, and responsibility. And that leaves one final question, meant less as a speech and more as an invitation. When the world's edges begin to move, when shorelines shift, and climates rewrite the rules, what kind of relationship will we choose with the places we love? Travel here if you ever do like a guest who understands the fragility of what they are witnessing. Stay on paths when dunes are thin. Respect signs where birds need silence. support local communities that protect what makes these coasts alive, and carry Denmark's message beyond Denmark that even small countries low wind-swept, stitched from water, can model a future built on attention, restraint, and care.